Short exercise 21-16, operating leverage. Happy Park competes with Pleasure World by providing a variety of rides. Happy Park sells tickets at $50 per person as a one-day entrance fee. Variable costs are $10 per person and fixed costs are $240,000 per month. The break-even number of tickets is 6,000. If Happy Park expects to sell 6,200 tickets, compute the degree of operating leverage. Round to 2 decimal places, estimate the operating income if sales increase by 15%. So now for our first requirement, if Happy Park expects to sell 6,200 tickets, compute the degree of operating leverage. Round to 2 decimal places, select the formula and calculate the amount. Round the degree of operating leverage to 2 decimal places, they remind us. So first we're going to need our formula here for the degree of operating leverage. So that formula is going to be contribution margin, here we go, divided by operating income. So in order to get these two, this contribution margin and operating income, we have to go through a few other formulas and steps. So we're going to circle back and review a slide here from our PowerPoint. We found out that there is a company with high fixed costs whose sales dropped from 12,500 to 10,000, which turned out to be a 20% drop. So then we calculated if they had a 20% drop in sales revenue, how that would affect operating income. So the way we did that is we took the 20% drop in sales, which is right here. We multiplied it by the degree of operating leverage for that company, and that gives us a percentage change in operating income. In this case, a 50% change in operating income, which is pretty big, and that's exactly what's happening. What happened, operating income was 4,000, but when sales dropped from 12,500 down to 10,000, operating income fell from 4,000 to 2,000, which is a 50% drop. In other words, the 50% change in operating income, so using operating leverage, can help you estimate how operating income will change in different scenarios. So in this problem, we're trying to figure out if sales increase by 15%, how will that affect operating income? And we'll use operating leverage to do this. So again, degree of operating leverage is calculated by taking contribution margin and dividing it by operating income. And out of the two of these, operating income is more intuitive to calculate, so we will start there. So to calculate operating income, and this is a screenshot of our solution, you just take the net sales revenue and you subtract both of the different types of costs, the variable costs and fixed costs, and that gives you operating income. So to calculate net sales revenue first, going down the rabbit hole here, we need to find out the number of tickets they expect to sell. So again, that is this 6,200 tickets. And make sure you do not grab this break-even number here of 6,000. So read carefully. So we expect to sell 6,200 tickets. And then the ticket price is $50 per person here. So if we put that into practice here, that is 6,200 tickets. And that's multiplied by $50 per person. And that gives us 310,000 for the net sales revenue. Now next in our quest to get the operating income, we need to calculate the variable costs. And that formula for variable costs is variable costs per unit times the number of units. So in this case, our variable costs are $10 per person, and then we are expecting to sell those 6,200 tickets. So what we're going to need to do is multiply then the $10 per person times the 6,200 tickets. So that is going to give us 62,000. So I can plug that in here if you'd like to see it on the calculator. So 6,200 tickets times $10, or the other way around. It'll give you the same answer there. And that 62,000 is our variable cost. So now that we have the variable cost, we can calculate that operating income. So that is going to be then the 310,000 in net sales revenue less the variable cost of 62,000 that we just calculated, and then we subtract the fixed cost of 240,000, and that will leave us with an operating income of 8,000. So to show you here, 310,000, and then we subtract out 62,000, and then also the fixed cost of 240,000. And that will give us, again, operating income of 8,000. So that's just going to be this part of the formula. That's not our answer yet. We still have to calculate contribution margin. So to calculate contribution margin, as a refresher, contribution margin is sales revenue minus variable costs. So we've already calculated both of those. So that sales revenue was that 310,000. And then we subtract out the variable costs, and that was the 62,000. And that then gives us a contribution margin of 248,000. There's also an alternative way here to calculate this contribution margin, and it's to use the unit contribution margin. You take the sales revenue per unit, which is this $50 per person. You subtract out the variable costs, so that would then give us $40 per person or per ticket. And then you would multiply that by the 6,200 tickets. So if we put that into practice here, it's 50 minus 10. So 50 minus the $10 in variable costs. That gives us 40. Multiply that by 6,200 tickets, and that gives us 248,000 for that contribution margin again. So again, that's just an alternative way to calculate this. So next we finally get to calculate our degree of operating leverage. So we already have contribution margin here for 248,000 in our calculator, and then we'll divide it by that operating income of 8,000 we calculated a little earlier here. So that is going to give us $31 for the degree of operating leverage. So let's go ahead and check our answer. Fantastic. Okay, so the next part here, we have to estimate the new operating income if total sales increase by 15%. Round your final answer to the nearest dollar. New operating income if sales increase by 50% equals. So we're going to do a little bit of review here and go back to our PowerPoint slide. So we calculated this degree of operating leverage. So if we multiply that by the percentage change in sales, that gives us our percentage change in operating income. So again, percentage change in sales times the degree of operating leverage gives us our percentage change in operating income. So our percentage change in sales, which is a positive 15%, times our degree of operating leverage, this $31, gives us the percentage change in operating income. So here's our calculation. Percentage change in sales, 15%, times operating leverage gives us the percentage change in operating income. And then we have to multiply that by our operating income, which is that $8,000. And that gives us our increase in operating income. So where did we get this operating income? We got it from up here. We multiplied that by 15%, percentage change in sales, and multiply it by our operating leverage of 31. And then we get an increase in operating income of 37,200. So remember what they're trying to figure out, what we're trying to figure out down here with this estimated operating income, not just the change, but the estimated operating income is. So to calculate that, we take the increase in operating income, which is right here, add that to our operating income, which again comes from here, this 8,000, and that gives us an estimated operating income of 45,200. So now you can go ahead and plug that in here for 45,200. So an increase in sales by 15%, we take 15% times a degree of operating leverage times our operating income gave us our change in operating income. And then we add that back into the operating income, and that gives us that 45,200 here, new operating income, which is our prediction of what will happen if sales increase by 15%. So business consultants make a lot of money using calculation links like this. So this is pretty powerful stuff. So to summarize, you can tell the CEO that if the sales increase by 15%, that operating income will increase by 37,200 for an estimated operating income of then 45,200. And then you can collect your big consulting paycheck. So that's it for this problem. Let's go ahead and check our answer. Good job.